I mentioned that a lot of startup PR is really just hitting those emails, reaching out, trying to convince people to run with your story. But sometimes the solicitations involve more of a formal submission process. So, an example of this would be an award submissions to become the best web designer or one of the top medical practitioners in your given city, these types of things. An example that I have displayed here is HubSpot. So, if you're in the marketing and sales space, one of the most popular places to be published is going to be the HubSpot blog. And you can see here they have a very detailed application process to follow where everything's laid out clearly about what they're looking for and how to submit your written content. They're going to say things like, we really like original research. So you can really cater to their needs in that way. So, as with outbound sales, outbound PR in the startup world is going to come with a small conversion rate. So, you're going to really need to solicit way more journalists and publications than you expect to be published in. Now, a certain fraction of those people are gonna respond, and a fraction of the people that respond are actually gonna end up ultimately publishing your content or featuring your video, whatever it is that you've created. From my experience, you generally want to follow up at least once. Now, a lot of people are going to say, oh, you need to follow up 7 times, 10 times. And we're going to talk later about how to automate those types of things. But what I would say anecdotally is that try to get at least one follow up and make sure that that follow up isn't just, hey, bumping this to top of your inbox. It's not just, hey, just following up. But in your follow up message, make sure you're actually saying something of value, perhaps just summarizing what you sent in the initial email, the initial cold email. So, for example, this is what I did when I was approaching the top influencers in the veterinary space. I sent a message to the top influencer in North America for veterinarians, and I simply sent one follow up email, and that's where the partnership got started. So that one follow up is often all you really need, or even the initial email is enough. Now, I'm going to highlight a few notes from the book Free PR. If you haven't read or listened to the audiobook version, it's something you may want to check out. And here are some of those key things to keep in mind. So, for every 100 pitches, you might get 5 story placements. So, again, just setting the expectation of you need to reach more people than you actually need. Journalists receive about 100 emails per day, so you need to make sure that you have something compelling and ideally catered to the specific type of content that they want to be able to get their attention. An example of a solicitation verbatim would be something like, I enjoyed your article about X, so whatever that topic was. I thought you'd be interested in a new solution. And then you can go into detail about why your product, why your service is a good fit for and aligns well with other articles that this person has published. Now, a verbatim for what your follow-up message might be would be something like, "What do you think of the story idea? I'd greatly appreciate feedback or suggestions." So one of the great things about this type of script is that you're encouraging them to reply, and you're not asking for a hard promise of, "Will you run with this story?" You don't seem that needy. You're just sort of softly asking for feedback or suggestions. And that response is the key to getting the conversation started and hopefully getting a long-term relationship started ultimately. And one of the things pointed out in this book also is that the relationships get easier over time. So once you get that initial story, once you get that conversation started, it's going to get easier and easier and easier to get published. Once you're published in one magazine, it's going to be easier to get the second one, and so on. The other key thing is having small asks. So, for example, instead of just saying, "Hey, will you run the story?" It's more like, "Hey, would you mind introducing me to the producer?" Instead of being like, "Hey, can you promise to get me on the show?" So, small asks, small promises can really help get the process lubricated. So, part of the solicitation process is really just getting the research, trying to figure out who to contact, what they like to publish, and then catering your pitch around that. So one of the keys is to look at where your competitors and your partners are getting published and reach out to the authors that have published content about them. So for example, I did a search here for A2X accounting and you can see I went to the news section. I'm able to see where they're getting published. They're getting published in the CPA Canada, which is perhaps the most prestigious accounting organization in Canada, and you can see, okay, well, they publish content, so maybe we can get published there as well, and we can use the credibility of the CPA brand in future marketing. You can see this site I've never heard of called BetaKit, also published content on this New Zealand company, software advice. You can just go through the news here and see if you're interested in getting published in any of those places your competitors were also published in. So, with the research, it's up to you how detailed and how formalized you want to get with this. So, one thing you could do is interview your current customers or just the target audience that you want, and try to find out where they go to get information. What kind of media do they follow? You could also survey them. So you could use a tool like I showcased here called Sentiment, and in my experience, it's about $15 per response, and you'll probably get 100 responses to get people and find out who your target audience follows in terms of media, in terms of influencers. Or you could create your own survey using Google Forms for free. Sentiment, for example, provides their own data collection forms, but you could use any sort of survey tool. SurveyMonkey is another example. Now, I'm going to walk through a tutorial later, but SparkToro is going to be an excellent place to first put in information about who your target audience is, and it'll spit out the publications, influencers, podcasts, etc., which is where you're also going to want to get published. You can also use this to do some competitor intel. Now, one of the keys with solicitations, and this is based on quantitative data research from gong.io, is you don't want to be too aggressive. You don't want to be like, just like when you're selling a product, you don't want to be like, hey, do you want to buy my product? Or hey, do you have 15 minutes for a meeting? What you want to do is have a softer ask, which is basically asking for interest. Does this story interest you? Or is this the kind of thing that your audience might be interested in? Instead of, hey, will you run my story? Or hey, will you meet with me? Way too aggressive. It's a huge turnoff. In my experience, most outreach, most cold outreach is way too aggressive, way too annoying. And as an influencer myself, I'm bombarded with messages from people that are just always trying to get something out of me. Hey, would you like to have a meeting right away? Hey, are you interested in buying? And it's just, it comes across very unempathetic. But when you ask people for interest, you have more empathy. And sometimes what you may even want to do is pay them for their time. So if the journalist is very popular, you can say, hey, I'll give you $100. I just want to get your thoughts on this story idea that I had. I'm new to PR, and I don't know if this is something that journalists are interested in. So what you're doing when you pay people for their time is you're saying, I respect your time. I understand you're getting 100 emails per day. And because of that, I'm going to reimburse you for your advice. So you can see here the research where when you have a specific CTA, which is like, do you have 15 minutes on Tuesday? Not very effective approach. Open-ended CTAs, which is, hey, do you have time to meet next week? Something like that. Not very effective. What's most effective is just trying to see if people have some sort of interest in what you're pitching them, and you're going to get a higher response rate. You're going to get a high meeting rate. You're going to get a much higher placement rate. And again, the research is coming from gong.io. Now, I have a detailed tutorial later in the course where I walk through step by step how to do this. But one of the best ways to get contact information from my experience is using LinkedIn. Now, you could just use LinkedIn. People, if you go to their contact information, you're able to see their emails a lot of the times. Not everybody puts their contact information, but a lot of people do. And a more formal way of doing this is using LinkedIn Sales Navigator, which is a paid premium feature within LinkedIn. So what you can do is you can find people using keywords like journalist, blogger, influencer, reporter, or you can do a search for an industry such as media and entertainment. And then what it'll do, Sales Navigator, is it'll spit out a list of people who meet these criteria. So what you could do is you could build a list of journalists, publications, etc., influencers, and use that as your solicitation group. And another level of complexity that you don't have to do, but is going to help you scale later, is to use scrap.io. What scrap.io will do is it'll scrape the emails from the people that you've collected in Sales Navigator, and it'll make it very easy to export that as a CSV, so as an Excel file. which then you can import into a cold email tool such as Lemlist. But again, I'll walk you through the technical details later. This is just a high level overview of you can gather contact information of journalists using Sales Navigator. One way to make it faster might be using scrap.io. Now, another thing to keep in mind is that you can reach out through social media and through people's contact pages. So just go to Twitter. A lot of journalists, reporters are very active on Twitter, or go to their Instagram. There's no reason you cannot message them there. A lot of people think, oh, well, this is a formal outreach. I should only use email. No, these are media companies. These are influencers. They're active on social media. There's no reason you can't contact them through these channels, especially if the email is not that effective. Response rate's not that high. Now, if your response rate is really low, there's what I call the sledgehammer approach. You can see this picture of a sledgehammer where it's you're given everything to grab attention. You're giving it all, and that is a direct mail box. So you can see this direct mail package. I've borrowed this from SAS MQL just to give credit here. But sending a giant 3D box with some free chocolates or a free mug, maybe a combination of little gifts, maybe a corporate umbrella from Dekker, something like that is going to get attention for sure. And it's going to get past the gatekeepers if there are any. And what you can do is you can have a one sheet letter that sort of describes the story that you want to get published. You could even present them with a $50 Amazon gift card and say, hey, if you just can get on the phone with me, give me some advice, or tell me your interest in the story, I'll give you $50 for your time. This is the sledgehammer approach. If all else fails, you can send direct mail, and you're highly likely to get a response rate, because who's not going to remember a giant gift box that they got, almost like a Christmas gift that came in the mail? And one of the things to keep in mind with this direct mail is don't just send it alone. What you want to do is you want to sandwich it between emails. So send emails to follow up and say, hey, I hope you enjoyed the package I sent you. Once again, my story is about XYZ, and I'm wondering if you have some time to chat about it. Here's a link to schedule time, or just ask them to reply if they're interested to get a meeting set up to discuss it further, or even just chat about it through email. Great aggressive approach, especially if you're going after high caliber influencers. Like think Oprah Winfrey or Susie Orman, or some of whoever the high profile people are in your niche. They're probably not going to be that big, but maybe they're pretty busy people. Now, one of the things you're going to be asking for is not going to be as clear as this is a specific story. What you might be asking for is a speaking engagement. So here's an example of one that I was able to get when I was working for this company, Webgility. Was I had the CEO as a guest speaker for a webinar with FeedVisor, and it's tips from an ex-Amazon insider, how to scale to a $20 million business. So one of the key things here is when you're looking for speaking engagements, it may be at big events or trade shows, et cetera. But sometimes really what you're doing is you're just looking for people or publications that have bigger reach than you do. So it's fine to publish your own webinars. It's fine to publish your own email publications, etc. But really, if you want to get wide reach, you got to find the people with bigger reach. And in this instance, FeedVisor had a wider reach with Amazon sellers. So this was a way I was able to reach them, was by soliciting them for a speaking engagement, a virtual speaking engagement in this case. Now, another example where I did this successfully was soliciting veterinarian podcasts. Now, I worked for this Google Accelerator startup where we were affiliated with the podcast, but I was able to leverage that credibility to solicit all the biggest podcasts veterinarians followed, and we were able to get tons of free speaking engagements to get on the air, talk about our product, talk about the product story, the company story, and basically what these were speaking engagements again for the CEO of the company, which is what you can do with webinars as well. Now, another example of where we can see the effectiveness of speaking engagements is with personal branding. So here is a case study, and I'm going to want to give credit here to the website where I've gotten this. Case study on Jordan Peterson. Now, Jordan Peterson is a Canadian professor who was just kind of a credible professor, and suddenly he became super famous. And one of the reasons he became so famous was because of getting essentially what are guest speaking opportunities. So you can see the spikes in his popularity and his subscriptions when he was featured on Joe Rogan twice, Joe Rogan being perhaps the most popular podcaster. You can also see what happened when he got on the Rubin Report. He got on these other podcasts, and then it really skyrocketed when he got on the Channel 4 News with Kathy Newman. So really what you're doing with speaking engagements is you're piggybacking off existing audiences and just having that opportunity to talk on the air to their audience can really skyrocket your brand. And that's how Jordan Peterson was able to build a personal brand empire that made him very profitable. Started getting him these giant book publishing deals. Really leveraging these audiences, these influencers. And you can solicit them yourself. If you have a good story, you have something worth talking about, maybe it's a research that you did or an interesting story, then you can get on the air. I've done it too. I've been on guest podcasts, guests on YouTube channels. Sometimes they approach me, but you can build a whole system of approaching them and get a constant flow of free PR. Free being you're not paying for it, but you are paying for it in terms of your time and the research that needs to go into preparing the presentation.